we're not doing international, we're doing
And then you'll discuss.
slide? Okay. Ready?
Guys are better.
Whatever they find for it. I can do that. You guys get ready? You guys ready? Good morning, everybody. My name is Ahmed Rehab. I'm the Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations in Chicago, CAIR-Chicago. My name is spelled A-H-M-E-D, last name R-E-H-A-B. I'm here with members of my staff, as well as the Executive Director of the Council on Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago, who will also be speaking. We are here to discuss the extremely disturbing uptick in anti-Muslim hate incidents and crimes here in the Chicagoland area in light of the unfortunate political atmosphere in which we are living. I've been around in this business for 19 years, and this is the worst periods that I've ever experienced in terms of the number, the volume, and the type, the nature of the cases that we are receiving. This is causing shockwaves in our community. There is palpable fear. What is even worse this time around than the last time our community was scapegoated, harassed, and demonized in the post-9/11 environment is now we're seeing children being targeted. And you've all heard about one of the worst hate crimes ever on American soil in terms of who it targeted, this defenseless child stabbed 26 times by an alleged veteran of the armed forces, a man who is a lot more powerful, went for a child who was defenseless to act out his rage, saying all Muslims must die. And then we get a letter to one of our local schools, that is an all-Muslim school, from an individual who gloats about this crime, who engages in insults against our angel who passed away, and says we need more children killed, and calling this murderer a national treasure, and engaging in many other racial and anti-Muslim epithets and vulgar language, one of the worst letters of hate I have seen. Also referencing the mayor of Chicago in racist language, and also attacking him as well, purportedly maybe because he was there at the funeral of the child just across from the school at that local mosque. We have received dozens of cases. On my way here, just a moment ago, I received another text saying that there has been an individual who harassed Muslims in a parking lot in Harvey, saying all Muslims must die, and this person is going to contact our office and give us detail. And this has been my life in the past week. This phone has not stopped ringing, the same with my colleagues in my office. It's been morning till night, very little sleep, dealing with this terrible atmosphere, not just in terms of the incidents, but in terms of the causal factors and how to push back. Trying to get on media like now, and to make an appeal to those who are in the media, to temper the conversation, to widen the conversation, to include what is happening to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, in order for Americans to understand the nature of the conflict and the suffering that these people have gone through, rather than to dehumanize and demonize through erasure by not telling their stories, by not showing their suffering, and therefore continue to make them, and us, sitting ducks. You know, our president had an address to the nation the other day, and while sometimes he will say the right thing, the general tone and the general attitude of what we're seeing from his leadership at the moment is partially to blame for this atmosphere. When President Putin of Russia has military excursions into Ukraine that cause the murder of thousands of civilians, we are rightfully quick to condemn those actions, to speak out at the United Nations, to call for restraint, etc. when this happens at the hands of Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, our president rushes by his side, whitewashes these war crimes and this genocide, pays for it, and then comes back home and says, we don't want any Islamophobia. We don't want any anti-Semitism. And these are collectively, as a community, to have the wherewithal, to have the moral courage to be able to condemn terrorism anywhere in the world. And I think that's been quite easy. But we need that same collective moral wherewithal to be able to condemn genocide and ethnic cleansing and war crimes and attacks that cause the murder of thousands of civilians. And we don't want to hear arguments about these are not targeted, they're just collateral damage in the thousands of innocent civilians. A military raining hell on a civilian population will cause civilian deaths, and the way that is covered needs to tell the truth about the story. Because ultimately the civil rights organization, my scope, our scope, is domestic civil rights. But we can't help but comment on what is happening because it is feeding into our space here domestically with all of these many, many dozens of hate crimes and hate incidents that are being reported. So we have here a few examples of these incidents, and we mentioned one. I'm going to call up one of our staff attorneys, Joseph Milburn, to discuss another hate crime. This is the second in less than a week that's required.
Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Milburn. I'm staff attorney at CAIR-Chicago, Joseph. Last name is Milburn, M-I-L, B as in boy, U-R-N. As Mr. Ahmed Rehab just discussed, earlier this week, a white man entered an apartment and threatened to kill 3 Muslims that were sitting in their apartment building. He screamed at them, he threatened to kill them, and we thank the law enforcement for rightfully charging him with a hate crime and causing threats to the community. Unfortunately, these are not isolated incidents, and rather this is a growing trend in a pattern that we are seeing. And if law enforcement is not able to put any strong deterrents, these threats can easily become realities. And we need to stand together to stop all forms of hate crimes against all communities, because our society as a whole is not safe so long as any segment of our society is not safe. Thank you very much.
I think we need to not just report on the incidents as if they're a consequence of the force of nature. Lightning, thunder, earthquake. These are man-made crimes. These are caused by something. Why all of a sudden are we hearing individuals say all Muslims must die? Why are they targeting them while they're young? Whether it is against the young boy, whether it is in the parking lot in Harvey, whether it is in Lombard, what is suddenly triggering this? And this is what we are talking about here, an atmosphere that is incendiary, that incentivizes individuals to act out against what has been claimed either by assertion or omission as a target, as a threat. And before I invite my colleague from CAIR-GC, I just want to quickly say that I was invited to be on CNN the other day, and I was in the green room, and I watched there for an hour as the coverage went from one clip to another, focusing entirely and exclusively on the perspective of Israel. You had families that have lost loved ones whom my heart goes out to and I sympathize with, and absolutely that should be covered. But that's all you saw. At the same moment, and they had lost them a week ago, but the moment that they were talking and where these clips were being showed, there were thousands of individuals in Gaza losing loved ones and running from bombs and artillery shells, and no visuals, no coverage. Is that what we do in journalism? Is that what we do in the media? Is that what our officials, the standard that they live up to be one-sided and not to be able to explain and contextualize what is happening in the world for our own benefit as Americans? I think our leaders in their statements are equally to blame for the atmosphere we are in. This press conference should be held by the mayor of Chicago, it should be held by the governor of Illinois. It shouldn't be held by the American Muslim community fending for itself in an atmosphere in which there are targets on our back for no fault of our own, other than how there has been poor leadership and unfortunate coverage of a situation happening halfway around the world. And then people ask, why are we talking about it? We are forced to talk about it because nobody else will. I want to invite to the podium Abdullah Mitchell, Executive Director of the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago.
Abdullah Mitchell, ABDULLAH, Executive Director of the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago. The remarks of Ahmed focused in on the impact that it is having on individual Muslims within our community. As a representative of the largest federation of Muslim organizations here in the state of Illinois, we're getting the impact of the leaders who are being tested by members who are concerned about their safety, even to go to a place of worship. Members who had schools and are afraid, what should we do for our children? It has put the burden on our leadership to, in essence, create forts to protect their members. This is not how it should be. The other point I would like to cover is the impact, once again, it has on the leaders and our everyday Muslims. As I mentioned, we are a federation of Muslim organizations. We are a part of the fabric of faith communities here in the greater Chicago area. And as a member of a faith community, and as true with all faith communities, the sanctity of life is paramount. The loss of life is, the preservation of life is what guides us all in our doctrines. Yet we witness no attention to the loss of life of Muslims in Gaza. Nothing. Not by our political leaders, not unfortunately by our interfaith leaders. It is easy to call people to task for what is occurring here in the United States, but to fail to address the root of the problem is a failure on all of us to have compassion and concern for our fellow human beings. So we call on all our interfaith leaders, we call on our political leaders, start telling the story, all of the story, not half of the story, so we don't stir up this needless and senseless violence that is afflicting the Muslim community today. Thank you.
And as I mentioned, thank you, Joe. As I mentioned, unfortunately, in this episode of Targeted Muslim, we've seen the last one post 9/11 for about a decade plus, and now we're back to that period, unfortunately. We are seeing now children, for some odd reason, being targeted. I want to bring up now to the podium my colleague, Maggie Slavin, who is Operations Manager at CAIR-Chicago, and a former teacher and a Fulbright scholar who will address this issue.
Hi everyone, it's Maggie Slavin, that's M-A-G-G-I-E, Slavin, S-L-A-V-I-N. I'm the Operations Manager here at CAIR-Chicago. I just want to call to our attention the fact that our children are at risk, especially Muslim children. We know that schools are already victims of security threats, of actual crimes that take place in schools. And I'm really calling on our political leaders and all of our interfaith leaders to understand that Muslim kids are especially vulnerable right now, and to understand the need for security at schools, right? Like Access School in Bridgeview received a threat the other day. So we're calling for increased security. We're calling also just for a basic understanding of the issue from our media. So not just the one-sided or the lopsidedness, but understanding that there's a Palestinian side of the story also, and that our kids are at risk and they're vulnerable in this moment. So we need to understand that as a community. We need to come together to protect our kids. Thank you.
So let me spell it out to the people in the back. If you're telling the story of the conflict in Israel and Palestine, and your telling of the story of the Palestinian side is reduced to one word, Hamas, you are lying to the American people. If you're not talking about occupation and oppression, 75 years of abuse of an entire population that is rooted in racism and otherizing, you are telling a lie to the American people. You're not talking about the fact that untold thousands more Palestinians have been killed than Israelis, many of them in the West Bank, in which Hamas does not exist, many of them prior to the foundation of Hamas in 1987. You are telling a lie to the American people. It's time to tell the truth, time to expand the conversation. The truth is not scary, lying is scary. And then let's work together to heal. No one supports murder. Nobody supports targeting civilians. Nobody supports war, hopefully. We want to work towards peace. Truth-telling is important. Working for justice is important. Protecting our communities is important. We're not just talking about hate crimes and hate incidents of the type that we've described. There are so many more complexities. We've had employers intimidate employees because they dare have a different perspective, essentially standing up for human rights in Gaza. School teachers and professors intimidating and harassing and sometimes abusing their students for having a position that is contrary to the line that has been monopolized in this country. Now we're talking about freedom of speech. Now we're talking about First Amendment. Where are the First Amendment people? Where are the freedom of speech people? This is America. This isn't China. This isn't Soviet Russia. How come we've come to a place where there is such rebuke and such retribution against those who dare not even stand up for something problematic, but simply for human rights? That's the point that we have reached. And we know, quite frankly, and we're not mincing words here, that we live in a country that has had episodes of shameful behavior in our history. This isn't new. If you're black, you know what I'm talking about. If you're a Native American, you know what I'm talking about. So let's not pretend that we have a moral edge over anybody. Let us actually rise to a moral standard. Because we keep saying we're on this city on a hill and the whole world needs to look at us and emulate us. We got to live up to that talk. And that's not what we're seeing right now. And if the Palestinians are going to be the canary in the coal mine to get that conversation going, so be it. But let's get it going. And I call on the media to start that. I call on the producers. I call on the journalists. Be brave, be courageous, break the mold, tell the story. I tell our politicians, do not fear to speak the truth. Because guess what? The Jewish community, many of them, stand for human rights. Stand with the Palestinians. Have you seen the Jewish voice on the street in DC and in Chicago? And this lie, another lie, that somehow the far right-wing extremist party, headed by Netanyahu, is somehow representative of all Jews in the world. That's the one that President Biden chose to coalesce with for some odd reason. It's just simply not true. There are many, including in Israel, who are opposed to what he is doing and what the military under his tenure is doing to the Palestinian people. So let's not also fall for monopolizing either Muslims or Jews, or even Israelis for that matter, or Palestinians. That's part of expanding the conversation. I want to thank you and open up to any questions or comments. Yes, sir.
If you could discuss a little bit more about what the Aqsa school is now doing post this threatening letter. I know Bridgeview Police is working with them, but I know some parents, they were kind of calling for this school to be closed for a couple of days following just this remote date of this Friday. Talk to me about the plan of moving forward since you all are working with them.
So they did the right thing by immediately exercising caution.